Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. Go by SEC Mike on the Twitters. And our friend, Steven Lassan, senior editor, Athlon Sports, back to drop some knowledge on us. Steven, how was your Thanksgiving? And are you buried by work right now?
Mike, I had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I ate entirely too much. The football was awesome from Tuesday night's games all the way through Sunday night's games. So no complaints there. Also, happy to report the Lassen household did not get into any fights. We did not plant any flags in the neighborhood. So we made it through in one piece. But man, it is a crazy time for college football, isn't it? The transfer portal already popping. We got some coaching changes, and oh, by the way, we still have championship games this week. So man, it's a crazy time out there.
Yeah, throw it all at us. So, man, and Shane and I will be down there in Atlanta. Hope to see some of y'all down there for. We don't really have official plans. We've been invited to some Texas parties. So hopefully I can survive those, Stephen. But yeah, so we'll be down there in Atlanta Friday, Saturday, and then we'll head back. But I'm looking forward to that. But man, we got a lot to break down before we get there. So we're gonna preview the SEC championship. Steve is gonna give us his updated playoff projections, his updated bowl projections, and playoff debates, and we're gonna dive into the transfer portal because that is a popping now. Doesn't officially open till next week, but you're seeing so many guys declare they're gonna enter the portal. So, man, we got quite the show here for them.
Man, we really do. It's crazy that we still have a week of games and there's this much stuff going on. But it's signing day's Wednesday too. So as if we need
just throw that on top of it, Stephen. I
Right.
forgot for again.
How are you holding up though? I know I saw your reaction when you realized Texas was running the league this year. Are you feeling okay? Do you need to talk about it publicly here?
Well, I'm not seeing a ton of them over here. We got Texas fighting here, so yeah, I think they're busy marching their way to Atlanta and the college football play. They're probably going to win the whole damn thing after I ran my mouth so much. So maybe I keep running it, Stephen, just because it's like I'm the last hater out there fueling the Texas Longhorns to glory once again. I deserve it for all the smack I've talked.
Maybe Texas is the SEC's best chance to win a national championship. So maybe it's good for SEC Mike to just keep doubting them, right? And they can use the fuel to their run to Atlanta and then the run to the championship game, right?
Oh, absolutely. And again, just fade all my picks. Even though I did get my bookie lock of the week last week. I picked South Carolina. As Steven said, wrong team was favored. Don't forget, presenting sponsor MyBookie. Head on over to mybookie.ag. That's a website, and that promo code that SEC THAT SEC. They will double your initial deposit, just like a double lock, not a fade, a double lock of them Gamecocks. Who was your lock last week, Steven? I'm trying to remember.
It was Florida.
Yeah. So. That was an easy one, Steve. I should have made you pick a different one because that Florida State team was just awful, aren't they?
Oh man, it's shocking how bad they've gotten in one season, and it's from a coach in Mike Norvell who was pretty good at the start of his tenure there in Tallahassee. So great way for Florida to close the season on this winning streak, beating LSU, Ole Miss, and now Florida State. And also you have to like what they're doing on the recruiting trail to close strong too. I have to admit, I was thinking about you and cousin Shane on Saturday when Vanderbilt took the kickback, and I was like, uh-oh, here we go. So I would be curious, what was the anxiety meter early in the day on Saturday for Tennessee?
Oh, I couldn't get Shane to respond to any texts, any phone calls. He was posting a little bit on Twitter, but I'm pretty sure he was posting and then muting the notifications immediately because Tennessee season looked to be going down in flames there for about 20 minutes. But he was sweating it out, but especially after he ran his mouth, and the 5 or 6 Vanderbilt fans out there really got after him. So he was nervous there for a good while.
It's funny because he was super confident like during the week. Like they're not going to sweat out Vanderbilt, right? And then
Here's the trick with Cousin Shane. I don't know if people have picked up on this yet. When he's super confident, that means he's nervous as hell. When he's nervous as hell, it means he's super confident. So that's a little peek behind the curtain there with Cousin Shane. His confidence is only to dispel his outward fear of how a game is going to come down to.
Well, the good news is Cousin Shane and Mike both got a victory, so they're feeling good. And the probably the team that is feeling the worst this week is Ohio State, right? After losing to Michigan, so and of course the shenanigans. So I would not be surprised to see Ohio State and Tennessee maybe match up in the first round of the playoffs. So could be an interesting path for the Tennessee Vols.
Yeah, no doubt, and it's always interesting to see Cousin JR, the legend, the man, the myth. He just donated another membership, Steven, this time to Nugs. Nugs, welcome to the family, brother. Looks like a Vol fan, so you're always welcome here, Nugs. But all right, Steven, we got a lot to go. Oh, Jay's back. JD's back. He was talking all that talk, like all the Auburn fans, Steven, going to the Iron Bowl. But he's back. He says I'm delusional, even though his team's god awful. And hey, Steven, in the bowl projections, let's skip ahead real quick. What bowl's Auburn going to?
Mike, can you give me a few minutes and check my notes here?
No, I can't. We'll get there. But before we get to all that, we do have some news around the SEC. Steven, let's hit on Sam Pittman. According to Brett McMurphy, it's been widely reported before, but Brett's kind of went out on a limb here and said it has been decided Arkansas bringing back Sam Pittman for sure. Throw up their schedule here. So they are going to the postseason. Arkansas is after last season missing it. But interesting time, Steven. Thoughts on that? Thoughts on Bobby Petrino possibly leaving? He's in the mix allegedly for the I believe the Charlotte head coaching position, and then their backup quarterback Malachi Singleton is reportedly going to be entering the transfer portal next week. So a lot of moving pieces there in Fayetteville. What's your thoughts on Sam Pittman set to return next season?
So I think obviously 6-6 is not where you want to be if you're an Arkansas fan, but to go from 4-8 to 6-6 was a step back in the right direction. And I think what I don't like to hear about if I'm Arkansas is the moving pieces thing. Like if you lose Petrino to be a head coach, you start losing some guys to the portal. Obviously with Taylon Green coming back, you are set at quarterback for next season, but it feels like if you can get Taylon Green settled, you run it back with Bobby Petrino, you got a chance to take another step forward next season. And especially if they're able to mine the portal effectively. The other thing is we're in this weird spot in college football right now where there's so much change. The roster limits are going to come into play. There's this house settlement with revenue sharing. It's almost, you're seeing this kind of college football wide where there's sort of a lack of desire to change your head coach. We've got West Virginia, Purdue, North Carolina, UCF. There's not a ton of power conference changes. And I think some of that is reflected by all of the changes going on behind the scenes, because it's almost like until you can get that settled, maybe it's better to ride out what you have unless you can go and get something better. And I think in the case of Arkansas, if you can bring back Petrino, you can bring back Travis Williams, like I mentioned with Taylon Green, you got a chance to be pretty solid next year. So I guess step one would be, I don't see an obvious replacement out there for them. Even some of the G5 names like GJ Kinney at Texas State, Jeff Traylor, they had 6-7 wins this year. So with all of that uncertainty, it almost seems like staying the course, and they were better this year. So I think that if Arkansas can run it back with the same core, there's a chance to take another step forward next season.
Right. And I'm glad you said that, Stevie, because, again, we'll see if they bring back Bobby Petrino. We'll see if Travis Williams is back, which I don't see why he wouldn't, but he's done such a good job. You hear his name attached to other defensive coordinator positions across the country. So I think that continuity could be huge for Arkansas. But what happens, Steven? I mean, this is why I don't trust any of these guys. I mean, there's a handful of guys I trust, but most of them I think are just, they're damn near close to politicians, Stephen. Well, Bobby Petrino came back here and, he said, I've come here to right the wrongs and I've done Arkansas wrong. And, I want to fix what I messed up, and Razorback fans ate it up. Heck, I ate it up too. And now we got the Charlotte opening, and he's like, "Oh, I may just jump ship to Charlotte." Like, what happened to fixing what you broke? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he steered the ship right on the offensive side of the football this year, but they were, there's still a lot of work to be done here. And Sam Pittman really went on a limb here to get you. So maybe see it through if you're really all about Arkansas, or is it just talk with Bobby like it always is? I don't know, but that's kind of struck me in a kind of a wrong way. And again, it's maybe his agent putting it out there. I don't know, but I think if you bring back these coordinators, you bring back your quarterback, you got an opportunity next season. Stephen, their Arkansas schedule is pretty interesting. Alabama A&M, Arkansas State in Little Rock, Notre Dame at home. That'll be great. Auburn, Mississippi State, Missouri, and A&M all at home. So a lot of winnable games at home for Arkansas. And I'm throwing Notre Dame in there, Stephen. I got respect for those Irish. You'll see. They'll get knocked out in the first round like they always do. And then, but here's the tricky part. You might lose all your road games here. At LSU, at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Texas. So either you need to hire you one hell of a head coach that can go in day one and start winning, which I can't think of many that would inherit this job and beat all these teams. And don't forget, at Memphis, that's a little bit of a trap game in itself. That's the final game for Arkansas. But I don't know. Like if they come back next year and they win 8-9 games, I think that possibility is out there, and wouldn't stun me. But if they hired a new coach, would it stun me if they won 8 or 9? I would be absolutely stunned.
It almost feels like they're not bad enough to tear it down. Essentially, like they're not good enough to be a 9-win team right now, but they're not bad enough to tear it down. And so I think continuity makes some sense here. To your point on the Petrino offense, 23.8 points a game in SEC contest this year. That was 10th in the conference. There's definitely room to grow there. Throw in what they're going to be losing at receiver and some of the other offensive line concerns. And there's definitely work to be done here. I think if you're Arkansas, and let's just say you were to lose Petrino, I think maybe the kind of biggest check in Arkansas's favor is Sam Pittman, I would assume, probably not going to be, I don't mean this like in a bad way, but I think you'll have your flexibility as your coordinator. You're going to be able to grow into that job. And also as an SEC program, you have the resources to go hire a good offensive coordinator if Petrino was to leave. So I think, obviously Petrino, integrity, necessarily keeping his word, not the best of it. I think for Arkansas it'd be good if he's back, but if he's not, I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk that the offense just gets like drastically worse. You're not going to hire Dan Enos again. I would assume that they go out and have the resources to make a good hire, but there's still, even if Petrino comes back, there's still a ton of work to be done here.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I really wanted to ask you about this, Stephen, because I know the Sooners are pretty fired up. They just hired, I don't know if it's official yet, but all indication they're going to land Washington State offensive coordinator Ben Arkbuckle. I don't know, no idea if he's related to Fatty, but can you tell us, Stephen, what do you know about this Ben Arkbuckle?
I think it's a great hire for Oklahoma. He's kind of a loose branch off of the air raid tree. So he's only, I think, 29 years old. And he was playing at West Texas A&M like back in 2019. And he ended up landing on a staff with Zach Kittley. You may hear that name soon because he's probably going to be the head coach at Florida Atlantic based upon some reporting this afternoon. So he took over at Western Kentucky after Kittley left to be the offensive coordinator at Texas Tech. And he was really successful at Western Kentucky, went to Washington State, and has been successful in 2 years. And I think the thing that stands out to me is the adaptability under different quarterbacks, because they had Cam Ward last year at Washington State, and then they had a first-year starter. This is important. John Mateer, who was very good this year. He led the team in rushing, good passer. So I think the ability to use different quarterbacks and build an offense to his strength is a huge check. And plus, like I mentioned, his background in the air raid, different things you can do in the run game too. I think he's very adaptable, and I think he understands you can't come in at Oklahoma and throw the ball 50 times a game in the SEC. Like, you have to be able to have some semblance of a running game. I mentioned John Mateer because this is what is fascinating to me about offensive coordinator hires and quarterbacks who could pair up somewhere else. Because basically, you can take your offense that's stuck at 35 miles an hour and supercharge it and go 70 real fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I am interested to see if Mateer hits the portal, because if he does, it's easy to connect him to Oklahoma. But even if he doesn't, I like the hire for Oklahoma. I think Ben Arbuckle is going to work out really well for the Sooners.
And was this Mateer, was he a transfer in to Washington State? Do you have any idea this year?
He is not. He was actually, I believe he was just a 4-year recruit. And
Gotcha.
this was his first year as the starter, too. And I mean, you look at his numbers. I mean, I think he's got like over 700 rushing yards this season. Their offense, Washington State was a top 25 team. They kind of cratered a little bit down the stretch, but this was his first full year as the starter, 29 touchdowns, 7 picks. And so he's just been a backup when Cam Ward was the starter, and then he took over this year. So he's grown into the job, and I think acquitted himself very well this season.
Right. So then the obvious question is, would you rather have this Mateer who's been in the system, obviously he's done quite well, or would you roll the dice and bring back Jackson Arnold, who would be new to the system, but he's flashed some promise, he's flashed some it's the opposite of promise. He's flashed some awful too. So I don't know if I realize it's not that easy. But if Steven Lassan were making the call, you only get one of these guys at Oklahoma. Who will be better for Oklahoma next year to win?
I think if you have to win right away, if you're Brent Venables, I think you got to make a play for Mateer if he hits the portal. I really like Jackson Arnold, and I think a lot of the problems that Oklahoma had this year, offensive line, receiver, not his fault. But I think if I need to get better right away, I think I'm going to take the quarterback that's played in this system. And I think it's pretty transferable, like talent-wise. So I would probably bring in Mateer if I was Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. And then, well, we're gonna get to some portal stuff here. But hey, how about this, Steven? Cousin Jonathan flying Hawaiian. He says Steven's better than Cousin Shay. So there you go. There, boost your ego.
Yeah.
Could you see? Again, this is all hypothetical. But if Jackson Arnold leaves Oklahoma, could you see him landing somewhere in the SEC?
It's a good question.
Auburn's looking. You gotta assume Missouri's going to be looking. I'm sure. Who knows what happens at Alabama? I couldn't imagine. Well, I was going to say I couldn't imagine him at Alabama, but then again, old DeBoer just fire up at Alabama, Oklahoma. Say maybe he'll say, we need to get this guy. You know what?
Right. I mean, certainly as a Texas native, I could see him maybe splashing back somewhere in the SEC. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I hate to kind of go back to something I said, but I still think there's a lot of potential there for Jackson Arnold. And I don't know how you evaluate a quarterback that's got that many receivers hurt.
Right.
When you're down to like walk-ons and like your fifth or sixth string receivers stepping into the one, it's so hard to evaluate these guys. And I go back to last year when he played in the Alamo Bowl and he played some others. I thought, he's really got a lot of tools that you'd like in a starting quarterback. So if he transfers from Oklahoma, and I think after the game Saturday, it kind of made it clear, I think, that he wasn't planning on it right away, that he will have interest around the league. And people are always looking for quarterbacks that have upside too.
Mm-hmm. Hey, shout out Cousin Chase. Just gave us $20, Steven. He's got a interesting comment here. Hot take, but correct. Only way the playoff will work is if the conference championship losers do not get in. The games will turn into patty cake if not, and I think he's talking about the conference championships. It boosts the playoffs to 16 teams without adding games. The committee rank teams sandbagging number 13. So I appreciate the question, Cousin Chase, but what's your thoughts on that, Steve? I mean, do conference championship losers, do they have any business being in the college football playoff? Or, I mean, I don't know that we can make any definitive statements like that. I mean, what if, I know this isn't the case, but what if Texas and Georgia were like 12-0 and 12-0? We can't kick him out because they have to play each other. But I see what he's getting at. But let me frame it this way: how often do you think the championship game loser should not make the playoff, as Chase is saying here?
So I think on his basic question, I think he is getting at something that's kind of an interesting point, which is what happens to the conference championship games in the 12-team era? Like, how much do they actually mean? And I think we may find that out this year, because I think the committee has kind of hinted that they're not going to punish teams who are in there. I don't want to punish a Georgia or Texas or Penn State or Oregon. Like, if you're in the conference championship game and you're a top like 8 team, let's say, I think it's hard to leave them out. And I think especially if you're playing in a matchup of Titans like Georgia and Texas, where they're both in the top 8, I don't think you can leave them out. I think the better question, is, and I think going forward, are they really necessary? Like, I mean, obviously they're necessary in the money front of this. They make a ton of money for the SEC and Big Ten, but is there an argument maybe to kind of change up your schedule at the end of the year? You create maybe an opportunity as sort of like a play-in game. If we get to the situation where the SEC and Big Ten are guaranteed 4 spots, maybe you have a play-in game for the last one to pair up 2 teams that aren't the conference champions. So I know it's getting away from his question a little bit, but I think anytime it goes like the top like 4 conference champions now and bye weeks and stuff. I hate punishing like the teams that are ranked that high. Like if Oregon and Ohio State are the top 2, they need to be 1 and 2. Same thing for Georgia and Texas. So I would like to see some changes to the playoff format, but I don't know if I can get on board with punishing the conference championship loser unless they're like seeded 8th, 9th, or 10th and they get blown out. Which could happen this
now, Steven, again, I like to call you the CFB encyclopedia for a reason, because you don't, the knowledge, and you're not a hot take guy, balances well with my hot takeness. But, and yeah, that game's not going anywhere, because, I mean, it's a running joke, but it's 4.5, 5 hours. Why? Because they have the Dr. Pepper halftime. And then after that, they, it's Nokia this and on and on. I mean, they'll do 20,000 sponsor reads there, and they want as many commercials, so they make all this money. And I get it, and it's just never going away, because they make. I think I heard, I could be wrong, but I think it's around $50 to $60 million just for that one game. So unless someone's giving them $50 or $60 million, they're not walking away from it. But let me put it this way, because Chase is right too. This game. Again, I'm going to be going down there. I don't even know if I'm going to the game, because well, first of all, we didn't get credentialed, and I don't want to spend a ton of money to have 2 teams battle it out, and then in 3 weeks they're going to be battling it out for real in a playoff. So you tell me, what would the fans be more interested in seeing? And I know Texas fans are fired up because they've never been to this. Georgia fans, honestly, I don't know how. I mean, they're excited to do well and make it there, but they've been there a million times. What would be more entertaining, Steven? Texas, Georgia, which we're getting, or Alabama versus Ole Miss, and the winner goes to the college football playoff, and the loser, shut up with all these debates. Let's play it on the field. And the only reason I'm not throwing South Carolina in, which I think South Carolina should get in over both those teams, but that's beside the point. The point is South Carolina and Ole Miss played. And Ole Miss whooped them at South Carolina. And also Alabama beat South Carolina. So in just this hypothetical I just created, because I'm a encyclopedia junior over here, but give me Ole Miss, give me Alabama. They did not play. They both think they deserve to get in there. Play it out. And I think that would be a hell of a lot more entertainment than watching Georgia, Texas, and then in 3 weeks, Georgia and Texas are in anyway. So who the hell cares?
I agree. I mean, first of all, Georgia and Texas, I thought it was interesting looking at the schedule this weekend. And it seems like I always remember there was another game on at the same time as the SEC championship. Not this year. It's like no other conference wants to go up with that 3 central time slot. Like they are just leaving it to the SEC because obviously, to your point, Mike, ratings, money, it's all there on Saturday. So, I mean, I'm fired up for Georgia, Texas, because I think it's going to be a pretty close game compared to the first one. But to your point, I mean, I would almost like that, like the winner take all, like play-in game type of thing, for
Right.
Ole Miss and Alabama. And I mean, like you said, South Carolina in there too, like setting up that type of scenario. I don't know how easy it would be to do in some years, because some years it's pretty obvious, like these 4 teams especially like this year in the Big Ten, where you've got 4 clear-cut teams at the top. You wouldn't want to just like take out one of your clear favorites with an extra game, but there's something there, it feels like. And I think going forward, if the playoff expands to 14, if there's some other changes, there's probably going to be some opportunities to get a little creative in the conference championship game, and hopefully changes in the playoff space too.
Right. And Paul's already mad. I can tell he's one of these dirty Longhorns. Mike making excuses. Georgia don't care because they've been there a million times. I mean, here's the point I'm trying to make, though, Stephen. And again, you tell me if I'm wrong, Mr. Encyclopedia. If Georgia wins in Atlanta and then they lose and they don't win the national championship, I mean, are they going to like hold a damn parade and, be happy they won the SEC? Or same thing, Texas. If Texas wins in Atlanta and then they lose the very next game in a playoff, I mean, are they going to give a shit? I mean, I don't think they are. I mean, if I'm Texas right now, my goal is to win the national championship. I could care less about. I mean, I know it's exciting. You're in the SEC for the first time, but if let's put it this way, Stephen. If Texas, let's say they whoop Georgia's ass on Saturday, they win the SEC, and then they meet in the playoffs again, and Georgia whips them, and Georgia wins the national championship. Do you give a shit? I don't understand why you'd care about that.
I think there's a level of prestige that the conference championship game, especially the SEC, has. But still, I think in the 12-team era, we have made it all about like getting into the playoff and getting to the national championship game. So I would think and you can kind of tell me if I'm wrong on this one. I think back to last season, and I think about how great the Alabama-Georgia game was. But all I can remember is Jalen Milroe getting stuffed against Michigan and Georgia not getting in. So to some extent, like that kind of proves the point of the SEC championship game is important, but the national championship will carry the weight there. And it's entirely possible that these two teams meet again in the semifinals, national championship, however it works out, because the loser and how this shakes out, they're probably going to be seated right there to play again. So I don't necessarily love the idea of them playing 3 times, but we might get it this year.
Right. Hey, real quick, shout out. Hello, 777 just became a member. Hello, welcome to the family, brother. But how about this? I forgot to prep you for this, so hopefully you saw this. I can play the clips if you missed it. But thoughts on old Brian Kelly? Where are we at here? We're 8-4, right? 8-4, lost 3 of the last 5. We lose the damn opener every year. I don't know how much you've looked ahead to next year, Stephen, but they open at Clemson, not neutral site Clemson, but at Clemson. So good luck, buddy. I mean, again, you should beat them, but should have beat Florida State and should have beat Southern Cal all 3 years too, in my opinion. But
if for LSU, we got to work on the scheduling. We got to schedule like Colgate or like somebody in week 1, right?
But the point being, Brian Kelly came out here after they whipped Oklahoma and said, buddy, we'll see you at the national championship game. And thank you. I know for old Glenn Gilbo out there, he said, well, wait a second. You said see you at the national championship. Are you talking next year? Are you talking 5 years? What the hell are you talking about, Brian Kelly? What thoughts on that, Stephen? Brian Kelly throwing the gauntlet down. And I mean, I made the point to Shane that Drink and Kiffin, they seem to be kind of put off that people like me all off season said, hey, this is playoff or bust for Ole Miss and Missouri. Here's Brian Kelly took a step further and said, hey, he's not saying national championship or bust, but he might as well because he's the one that said it, see you in the national championship.
So on the Ole Miss and Missouri thing, I mean, there's no shame in like winning 9 games and falling short, but all the things are lined up for both those teams to be playoff teams this year. So I don't want to say it's like super disappointing, but it is a little disappointing. Like if you're Ole Miss and you look at your roster and you think, man, we got to reload this offseason. So I think that's the danger for Brian Kelly is like you're already setting the bar super high in a season where, I mean, you're going to be losing, I assume, Will Campbell and probably most of your offensive line. And of course, they still have defensive questions. I would guess that he probably feels good about Garrett Nussmeier coming back. But the other thing is, we'll look around the SEC later this offseason for like 2025 power rankings, but I wouldn't put LSU at number 1 or even number 2. Would you at this point?
No. Maybe in the Sun Belt, you know what I mean? Like, get the heck out of here. But again, I appreciate the fact that he's throwing the guy. I mean, he's called a shot. I like people that call their shots, but I don't know where he's coming up with that one. I mean, that's a national championship. You haven't even sniffed the playoffs, and you've been there 3 years, and your former team is marching their way to the playoff.
Maybe he meant he was just going to be like on ESPN as a commentator or something. That's what he meant.
And then last one, Steven. Again, I don't know if you saw this, but I came prepared here. Bryan Harsin. Oh, what a guy here. What a guy here is. Of course, former Auburn coach. He posted a photo this morning with a Bible verse, and he says, "Cheers to the winners championship week." And if you see closer, you might have to squint to see it here, but he clearly did this intentionally. He's got on an Alabama Lank shirt, obviously cheering to Alabama beating his beloved Auburn Tigers. So the pettiness remains for Bryan. Some people think this is super petty. I think the way they did him was pretty wrong. So just thoughts on that, Steven.
I appreciate the trolling and pettiness of everybody in college football right now. So yeah, let's bring it all out there. Let's get it all out there. Let's let every coach be petty. I will say, if I was just like being like really snarky, I would say if you maybe spent more time on recruiting and not trying to troll, maybe you would have worked out as the Auburn coach. Also, just saying that Auburn hasn't exactly been great since you left, so I wouldn't say it's a great indictment on your recruiting either, right? I mean, if like Hugh Freeze went like 10-2, you would say that Harsin left some talent in the program. But I admire the pettiness, and maybe we'll see Bryan Harsin back on the sidelines one day, and he can become like the world's greatest troll, like Lane Kiffin is on Twitter.
Yeah, it will never be in the SEC, but good luck to him. You know what?
Yeah, there's maybe jobs in the Mountain West he could get, but definitely not in the SEC at this point.
Right. Well, I know where he could get a job, and I'll write him a recommendation, Steven, if I can do it. And that's at Cornbread Hemp, cornbreadhemp.com. Check them out. Promo code SEC. They got a deal right now, Steven. They sent me this little mug here. I'm loving my Cornbread Hemp. I got some more of the CBD sleep gummies. I've been sleeping like an angel, Steven. I don't know if you can tell. I'm energized here. But again, for our listeners, promo code SEC over at cornbreadhemp.com. Listeners get buy one, get one free for every product over at Cornbread Hemp right now. So go check them out. This is USDA organic THC gummies. They also have the CBD sleep gummies like the one I'm telling you I love. There's no harsh solvents, no chemicals, no industrial acids, unlike other hemp. No synthetic ingredients, and this is Farm Bill compliant for legal adults over 21 years of age. Cornbreadhemp.com, and don't forget that promo code SEC. Buy one, get one free over at Cornbread Hemp.
Clearly, that's what Brian Kelly took after the game. So he was feeling so relaxed. He got a good night of sleep before the Oklahoma game and thought, you know what? I'm going to call my shot for next season. So here we go. We're going to the national championship, and that is LSU. So that's, I think Brian Kelly is definitely on the Cornbread Hemp train there.
Yep, and some of the cousins, Steven, they may need them because we got your updated college football playoff projections, and oh goodness, Steven, oh goodness, this thing has been blown apart in the last week or two. Yeah, again, as always, got to remind you guys because this is all new to us, but the top four, not necessarily, Steven saying the best four teams. It goes the highest ranked conference champions. So Oregon, number one, no surprise there, is the projected Big Ten champion. Texas, number two, is the projected SEC champion. Oh my, this is when we should blew up this whole thing, Steven, and credit you called this about 2 years ago when they announced the format. SMU, what? I don't even know what league. I guess it's ACC now. They bought their way into the ACC. Number three overall, when they'd be number 13 in the SEC probably. Boise State, number four, as the projected Mountain West champion. So those are your first round buys for those four. And then we got Penn State, number five, hosting number 12 Arizona State as the projected Big 12 champion. We've got number 6 Notre Dame hosting number 11 Alabama. We've got number 7 Georgia hosting number 10 Indiana, and number 8 Ohio State hosting number 9 Tennessee, with Steven's bubble teams Ole Miss, South Carolina, Miami, Clemson, and Iowa State.
Mike, I think the biggest thing that we have to watch for on Tuesday night with the rankings is Miami and Alabama. And then how do they treat Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss? My feeling is they're not going to jump South Carolina ahead of Alabama or Ole Miss at this point. But the win over Clemson will be big. I mean, that was a ranked victory. Ole Miss beating Mississippi State, Alabama beating Auburn. Of the three, South Carolina picked up the best win. Does it move the needle in the committee's eyes? I'm not sure it does. I have Alabama in over Miami. I think that's going to be the biggest kind of focal point on Tuesday night. If the committee has Alabama ahead of Miami, I think then if you're an Alabama fan, you want SMU to beat Clemson. Because if Clemson wins, I think both Clemson and SMU are getting in. So where does the SEC teams rank in relation to Miami? And then what happens in the ACC championship game sort of settles whether the SEC gets 3 teams in or 4 teams in. I think Alabama, Miami, you can make a pretty compelling case either way. I just think Alabama's got those 3 wins over ranked opponents, including a Georgia team that could win the SEC. And I think that has to count here for that last spot. So that's why I've got Alabama in over Miami for that last bubble spot at this point.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but I believe Boise State is playing UNLV in their conference championship. So clearly, Boise State projected winner here. What happens if UNLV were to win that football game? Where would they project in something like this?
It's a great question. That's SEC, old SEC friend Barry Odom out there doing a good job at UNLV. I think you could basically slot UNLV in at 12. And what that would do would move the Big 12 champion to the 4 seed. And then probably, you would keep it Oregon, Texas, SMU, and then the Big 12 champion would become the number 4 team getting a first round bye.
I mean, how silly? How silly is all this, Stephen? Who signed off on this? Sankey, this is the first time you screwed up as SEC committee. I mean, how if and when this happens, and let's say they leave Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina out, which I hope they all make it. I know they probably won't, but let's say they do, Steve. Let's say they leave all these SEC 3-loss bubble teams out. How soon before we go to this 12 automatic qualifiers? I mean, it's got to be immediately, right?
It's going to be 2026 for sure. Because I think the contract runs through this season and next season, then they have to re-up it. And I think, to your point, I think it gets at something, which is the SEC and Big Ten have the leverage. And it's like, we can just take our ball and we can go over there, or you can come play with us on this court over here. And so I would expect that if it expands, the SEC and Big Ten will probably get most of what they want in that negotiation. I would, Miami is very qualified to be in the playoff, but when I look at their schedule and I see, close wins over Virginia Tech, California, losses to Georgia Tech and Syracuse, they have not beat a ranked team. I would be kind of surprised if the committee has Alabama behind Miami. So, Mike, to your point, I think if you're rooting for more SEC teams, you are the biggest SMU fan in the world. And of course, that is old SEC friend Rhett Lashley leading the way over there at SMU. And you want Alabama to be ahead of Miami in tomorrow night's rankings.
Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of Tennessee fans, they're wanting a home game here for the Vols. How does that happen, if it can at all? Because Ohio State just got embarrassed, so they will fall. How far? I mean, that'll be something I think Tuesday will be very telling, because they obviously don't have another matchup. Like, let's say it's Penn State and Oregon, right, in the Big Ten championship. Yeah. What if Oregon blows Penn State out of the water? Would that help a Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, or whoever potentially get a home game?
I think so. So Penn State has one victory over top 25 team, and that is Illinois. And at that point, they would have that second loss. So I think there would be a danger of Penn State falling. My instinct probably tells me that they will slot Penn State maybe right ahead of Tennessee, but I don't feel strong about that. I think maybe the other thing to watch is what if Texas loses? Georgia wins. Does Texas fall behind Tennessee or do they stay ahead of them? I think I've got Tennessee at 9. They are right here on the bubble to host a first round playoff game. I almost think if you're a Tennessee fan, you know, you're probably rooting for Georgia to win that game, and then Texas to fall behind Tennessee at with that second loss. But it's close because Georgia, of course, having the head-to-head win over Tennessee might count for something in the committee's eyes.
Mm-hmm. And then again, I realize, well, we're running out of games, so not a ton more. And I know this isn't finalized or anything, but do we still think that the number 5 seed is potentially the best in the bracket? Again, and that's another issue with this whole thing, because again, I'm trying not to be completely disrespectful to Boise, but let's throw in let's say Georgia was the 5 seed. I mean, if Georgia that we know of, or Texas, I mean, whoever you want, put them at the 5 seed. I mean, they're walking to the semifinals, right? I mean, is the fifth seed still the best path, perhaps?
Absolutely. I mean, to give you sort of a neutral view on this, ESPN's Football Power Index has Arizona State at 28 and Boise State at 27 and Georgia at 5, and Texas is the number 1 team in those rankings, in those metrics. So yes, if I don't get a bye, I want to be the 5th seed because they would be heavily favored over Arizona State and Boise State if that's the way it works out.
Mm-hmm. And then I said I was going to ask you this, so I'm going to ask you, Steven. Again, this is ridiculous. SMU number 3 in the whole thing. Let's throw up I guess Georgia's schedule. Just a projection here. What would mighty number 3 SMU? How do you think they would fare, best case scenario, if they had to play Clemson, which they're going to get Clemson this weekend? So that'll be answered there. At Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss, Tennessee at home. How many? And I mean, Florida's red hot. Let's play Florida in Jacksonville. What's SMU's record after this gauntlet?
I think you have to have them probably as an underdog in 4 games at least. I mean, Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee, I think what's interesting too about SMU, they have done a really good job at mining the transfer portal, and they changed quarterbacks early in the season. So they're probably a little bit different team. If you watch the opener between SMU and Nevada, they're probably a little bit different team. But I think the point still stands, I think, Mike, that you're getting at, which is the strength of schedule this year in the ACC has not been great for SMU, and the gauntlet that Georgia has run, or even Alabama, they would be an underdog in probably at least 4 of those games.
Mm-hmm. Greg Sankey, he paid me to ask you that. All right, let's get to your SEC bowl projections, Steven. Again, this graphic created a lot of buzz last week, so let's throw it up here again. But can you run us through your playoff projections, or excuse me, bowl projections here?
Absolutely. So I did want to say one thing, which is there is no more New Year's 6 bowl games, unfortunately. They're all playoff games now. So that's kind of why, if you're one of the top teams, you're headed to a Florida bowl game this year. So a little bit of shakeup in the bowl selection process this year. But over in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, we've got a great matchup between Illinois and the red hot South Carolina team. If that's the way it works out, that would be a heck of a matchup. In the Texas Bowl, Baylor versus LSU. That is the Dave Aranda bowl there. He's done a nice job of Baylor rebounding after Dave Aranda was on the hot seat the last couple of years. In the Gator Bowl, Louisville and Florida. I mean, Florida, what a rise in the bowl projections the last couple of weeks, barely getting into now one of the better games in the SEC. Over in the Gasparilla Bowl, we've got Pitt versus Vanderbilt. In the ReliaQuest Bowl, this is the artist formerly known as the Outback Bowl. It is Iowa versus Texas A&M. In the Las Vegas Bowl, this is the Lane Kiffin showdown between USC and Ole Miss.
Yeah.
What a heck of a game that would be. Missouri and Michigan in the Music City Bowl. Of course, Luther Burden went to the NFL, opted out for the bowl game, but would be a heck of a matchup with the way Michigan is playing after beating Ohio State. Over in the Liberty Bowl, a showdown of old Big 12 foes in TCU and Oklahoma, and in the Birmingham Bowl, NC State and Arkansas.
Yeah, it's interesting, Stephen, that based on last week, we lost a team in SEC Bowl. Is that because in your updated projections that Alabama is in the field?
Yes. So last week, Alabama was out of the field. This week, they moved in. So one of those bowl games dropped off. Now the SEC has, I think, exactly enough teams to fill its allotted bowl spots. Last week, they needed one extra one. But if Alabama doesn't make the playoff, there's 82 bowl teams and 82 spots. It worked out perfectly. There's no SEC team that will get left out this year.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Well, just interesting that, man, these matchups are going to get more and more unique with opt-outs and things of that nature. I don't know if you caught it, but Drink said after their win in the finale against Arkansas, he said, you'll be surprised how few opt-outs we have. So does that mean just Luther? I don't know, but it'll be, those always kind of determine the matchups is who's playing, who's not. And it's funny, Steve, because it seems like, like if a quarterback opts out, everybody's like, oh, the other team's going to get it done. And oftentimes it's the next man up that comes out and he's got something to prove. So these games are always a little wackier than normal. And man, I can't wait for it.
They are basically like preseason games at the end of the year. And it seems stupid to say that, but it's like I love bowl games. I like watching the next stars of college football. Last year, I loved watching Nico play Iowa. It sort of gives you an early look at next season. So it's a little different. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to watch Luther Burden play Michigan in that defense one time. But at the end of the day, it's like we get to see these teams one more time. A handful of seniors are playing, and there could be some good matchups. So I'll be watching every bowl game. Count me in for them.
And yeah, I mean, and I know this has been floated out there. I guess they'll never do it, but heck, if they're so greedy, they might as well give it an opportunity. I mean, I feel like at the end of the spring, they should play bowl games. I mean, why not? I would sign up to watch SEC versus Big Ten spring games, wouldn't you?
I absolutely would. It would give us a better idea of where some of these teams are, as opposed to just playing a spring game where the score system is kind of engineered to be strange and also geared towards offense. I have also seen before that somebody has proposed the idea of playing them as preseason, like week one games. Like basically you set the games up and you play them all in week one. So I'd be open to that too, as like week one bowl games or off-season scrimmages too. I think either one would be probably a better system than what we have now.
That goes for a lot of things though, Steven. You know what?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that, I take away from bowl games, and I see this every year, is everyone, there's not some sweeping grand conclusion you can make from bowl games anymore because they're played 2 or 3 weeks after the season, the opt-outs, the transfers. Some of these teams are just a shell of kind of who they are, but it is like one more time to see these guys play. And if South Carolina doesn't get in the playoff, seeing Lenora Sellers play one more time is going to be fun this year. Seeing what happens with Ole Miss and sort of like, does Jackson Dart play in a bowl game? Does Austin Simmons go? So there's just so many angles to what could happen in the postseason, but they definitely make our holidays go a little quicker, right? To have football on the TV for 3 weeks.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, next, but before we get there, Steven, we got the transfer portal and SEC championship preview. But before we do that, real quick, I want to remind the cousins this week, we're also sponsored by Shop Mando. Steven, how about it? ShopMando.com, whole body deodorant. New customers get $5 off a starter pack, which is 40% off the price there, Steven, over at ShopMando.com. Use the promo code SEC for $5 off your order. The starter pack's perfect for new customers. You get a solid stick deodorant, a cream tube deodorant, 2 free items of your choice, and free shipping over at ShopMando.com. That's ShopMando.com. ShopMando, promo code SEC for $5 off. And Steven, I might have to send you some based on your thoughts on the transfer portal. Instead of the panic meter, we're doing panic transfer portal. So I asked Steven to just kind of break it down on, what areas each team really needs to attack via the transfer portal. So I'm kind of fascinated to see where you come, what you got for us here, Steven.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, it's interesting because we're still in that space of like where the rosters are sort of just in flux with the NFL draft, and there's some seniors, of course, who have another year of eligibility. So this is also kind of an important time to start thinking about next season too. So it just gives you an idea of like the basics of the roster construction and where teams can go from here. Kind of gives you an idea of like who might have the biggest weaknesses going into this offseason, and certainly like which teams are, maybe dipping heavy, which teams are lighter. And of course, we see Georgia and Alabama in the past have been lighter, but also heavier on the higher impact players, if that makes sense. So be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just go in alphabetical here, Steven. Alabama, what position or position groups do you think the Tide really need to hit in the portal?
You might call me crazy on this one, but I'll start here. Quarterback. Does Jalen Milroe come back next year? I think is a question.
It sounds like he will not.
So if he doesn't, do you have to consider a quarterback if you're Alabama?
Well, in goes Ty Simpson. If that's the case, I would imagine. I mean, he seems dead set on it. But
Right.
Well, they got that, and then what's the guy's name? I think his name's is it Mack? That the guy they signed at Washington, got him to transfer in. They've got another 5-star incoming, but yeah, that's going to be one of the biggest storylines I think for the Crimson Tide because, it really just depends on who's out there. But I think if you add someone, I think you're going to lose Ty Simpson. Is that a loss? I don't know. He was a high-profile recruit himself. But they sure can't go 8-4 or 9-3 again, So, yeah. This is kind of cheating, Steven, but I think it really depends on who's out there.
I agree, and also I think Dylan Lonergan is still on the roster.
Oh
too.
yeah. So and he was the one. I read a book on Nick Saban. He said that this is my guy, but they didn't feel like last year he was ready, and we've never heard from him again. So maybe he wasn't the guy, but yeah, throw him into the mix too.
I think it's probably low on the list of portal needs for Alabama, but also I think it's on the radar, at least for me, like just to see what happens with Milroe and
Right.
some of the backups. But I think if you put aside quarterback, I think for Alabama, I definitely think line of scrimmage, because you're probably going to lose some guys to the NFL draft, like Tyler Booker, maybe even Parker Brailsford on the interior of that offensive line. So you got to fortify the offensive line for next year. But also, I could see them also doing that on defense too. We saw what Oklahoma did to them a few weeks ago, finding high-level guys who can change the game on the defensive line. Probably every SEC team is looking for them. But I think you could look at line of scrimmage as a need, maybe even linebacker, and maybe even another playmaker or two at receiver.
Well, I wonder if DeBoer can get some nice non-shirts out of the portal. That really killed him against Vanderbilt. You know what?
I think he's going to need a very hefty portal haul.
He's got to go to the department store portal. You know what?
Right. Yeah, the dollar. Yeah.
All right.
Better.
How about Arkansas, Steve? Where's the biggest needs here for them Razorbacks?
I think, as always with Sam Pittman, I go right to the offensive line. Do they have any upgrades in the portal that they can get to continue to improve that offensive line? It took a step forward this year, still needs to be better. With Taylor Green coming back, you're set at quarterback. So I think, can you surround him with another weapon or two at receiver? I think you're going to lose Andrew Armstrong and maybe another receiver or two. So adding depth at receiver, the offensive line, and also I think on defense, the secondary struggle this year, I would add some guys there. And then Landon Jackson gone, defensive line looks like a big time need for me for Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that you said weapons, because again, Andrew Armstrong, I didn't realize this till I did the graphic this morning, Stephen, but he ended up leading the SEC in receiving, which is pretty stunning. But
I think
man,
very underrated, I think, is for sure.
right. Very consistent, but not necessarily a game breaker. And with Taylor Green, it seems like they have good weapons at Arkansas, but I don't know. They need to find some explosiveness that it just wasn't there near enough this year. I didn't feel like, and certainly I think helping the secondary would aid them significantly as well.
Yeah, I think secondary for sure, getting better in that side of the ball, deeper. The more depth you could have with the quarterbacks in the SEC next year is going to be huge. To your point on the passing, big plays in the passing game, Taylor Green was 13th in the SEC in plays of 30 plus yards, passing plays. So I think you could use maybe a speed threat or two to get somebody stretch the field. You feel good with Luke Haas coming back next year. And I think they're going to lose Jaquindon Jackson, but their running backs should be solid. So I think it's all about can you build from in with the lines and then add to the outside, like your receivers and defensive backs, to see if you can take a step forward next year.
All right, how about Auburn, where, buddy, they better go all in here because again, they got talent, loads of excuses, but seems like every quarterback on their roster, short of the true freshman White, is going to be leaving via the portal. So have to think quarterbacks top of your list here.
100%. Quarterback is the biggest need for me for Auburn next season. Interestingly enough, Caden Salter, who was at Liberty, he's a former Tennessee guy. He played at Liberty under Hugh Freeze. He hit the transfer portal today. So be interesting to connect the dots there. He had kind of an up and down year at Liberty. Maybe if he goes to Auburn, maybe he can get back on track. But I think Auburn's got to get a quarterback because they've got the receivers. I think they need improvements along the offensive line. That group struggled this year. And you start to look at that defensive personnel, linebacker, interior defensive line, those are needs. But really, this all comes back to finding a quarterback if you're Auburn, because that offense could take off if you find the right guy.
Mm-hmm. And I would say a head coach, if you can find one in the portal, but ain't going to be there. Ain't going to be there, Steven. But
Bryan Harsin's unemployed. So.
All right, how about Florida, Steven? This is what they're red hot on the recruiting trail. Allegedly the plan, and who knows? I mean, I certainly think it is in high school recruiting, and it's working, is use all the money we were going to fire Billy Napier with and use it on players. So I have to imagine that Florida is going to be very active in this portal.
100%, Mike. I definitely agree. I think Florida has a real opportunity this offseason because I think with DJ Lagway coming back next year, I think they're going to be a top 25 team. I think they have that kind of potential. And so I think you start by thinking you have a quarterback who other receivers probably want to come and play for. And Florida has done a good job, whether it's Ricky Pearsall, Chimere Dike, others that they brought in through the portal. They are going to lose some of those guys this offseason. Badger, too, from the Arizona State transfer. So I think go out and get some weapons to surround DJ Lagway with is priority number one. Offensive line, I think maybe depending on there's some guys who have a chance to come back next year. If they all leave, maybe you try to fortify your offensive line. And then I would also like to see Florida try to improve in the secondary. This is a group that struggled this year. Their pass rush came on as the season kind of progressed. But with all the injuries and kind of inconsistent play, I think you need to fortify that group and then fortify the interior of your defensive line because you're going to have some personnel losses there. But for me, number one has got to be restock the weapons around DJ Lagway so this offense can take off even higher next year.
Yeah, just surround him with as many weapons. I think they've got a good deal in it. But secondary certainly stands out to me. And you could just never have enough really good defensive linemen. So I'd like to see them load up there as well. Hey, how about this, Steven? We appreciate you, Chochin. I hope I didn't butcher that too bad. Something to clarify. RE Texas Tennessee comparison. They were both only down a touchdown in the fourth quarter of Georgia. The way Tennessee fans talk, I think they were blackout drunk for both second halves. But thoughts on that, Steven? How close are Tennessee and Texas I guess in terms of head to head against Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think this weekend will give us a better idea because it feels like Texas is probably, I think, probably better equipped this time to play Georgia. But to his point, I think, of course, Tennessee jumped out to the early lead, and then after that, it was pretty much all. Georgia was kind of in control of the game. So, I mean, I lean Texas is just a better team than Tennessee right now if they get blown out this time. And I think the first game, I kind of felt like Georgia was just in control. Would you agree with that, Mike? Like, regardless of the score, was Georgia just felt like their defense was so you weren't able to get anything going if you're the Texas offense, if that makes sense.
Right, and I do like how people kind of made it out to be like the fans were like so strategic in their bottle throwing, and Kirby, of course, after the game, they tried to steal it from us. You saw her down there, but it's like, again, I don't like to see bottles thrown, but I have literally probably seen every fan base throw things onto the field, so, but yeah, aside from that little moment, I thought Georgia dominated that one. And Georgia didn't even play that well on offense, and they still dominated, which was impressive.
I mean, both teams were under 300 yards in that game, and Georgia played, and a lot of that's due to, of course, the Texas defense too. Texas had defense had a lot to do with that, but they played pretty shaky on offense in that game. So it's interesting to think about that because if you're Georgia, I think your offense has been kind of picking up steam the last few weeks since the Ole Miss loss, and you're coming off the crazy overtime game against Georgia Tech. Like maybe there's a little bit of confidence there, and you're going up against a really good Texas defense, but you're also Texas, and you're thinking Georgia Tech used a lot of motion, misdirection, and threw Georgia off. Like there's some opportunities there. It feels like this game might be played a little different than last time, but I think in that power ranking, I would still keep Texas ahead of Tennessee if Texas loses on Saturday. But maybe the committee disagrees with me.
Well, speaking of Georgia, Stephen, where should they? They're never one to go super heavy into the portal, but thoughts on where they'll go, and they need some more weapons. It seems like they add guys like crazy at receiver, yet for one reason or another, they never seem to have a superstar out there.
Absolutely. I think that is exactly where Georgia's needs have to start. It has to start at receiver. You're going to lose some guys to begin with. You could probably use some more depth at receiver. So I think receivers priority number one. I think maybe on outside of that, you're looking at maybe a safety. Malachi Starks, I would assume, is going to the NFL. On the defensive line, they've been a little bit more vulnerable to the run this year than in years past. So I could see if there is a high impact defensive lineman, I would expect them to maybe get involved with it. And this is Georgia. I suspect that they will only take the best of the best in the portal.
Right. Yeah. Because quite frankly, they've got a pretty loaded roster right now, and don't need a ton of help. But how about this though, Stephen? Again, the timing, it makes this also unique, but we have to assume, does Carson Beck, does he have any eligibility? The way they talk, he's a 6th round pick now, which is ridiculous. But let's just assume he's not there next year, which I think is a safe assumption because he'll be in the NFL. Kirby has been known to dip his toes into that portal for a quarterback, even when he may have derailed 2020 when they added too many. But
what was your favorite moment of the Jamie Newman era at Georgia?
I think my favorite was Pro Football Focus rating him as like the 3rd best returning quarterback in the country. And I mean, that was asinine. He played at Wake Forest the year prior, but yeah. And then he never took a snap, which is beautiful. But I guess, same thing as we said about Alabama. If there is some superstar, and I don't even know who that would be, maybe you can come up with one, but if there is a superstar quarterback that enters the portal, do you think Georgia would get involved at all?
I think it would have to be the best of the best. Between Stockton and Rashada, they're probably okay at quarterback next year. I've been intrigued by Stockton's potential, and certainly we saw Rashada start at Arizona State some before he got hurt. Every year you hear mixed things on the portal. There was some reporting by 24/7 that said the quarterback market could be a little light this year. I'm not anticipating that big name getting in there, so I would be surprised if they dip their into the portal for a quarterback.
Brock Vandegrift? No, okay, sorry. Hey, shout out Isaac. Isaac just became a member. Isaac Condry. Isaac, welcome to the family. All right, how about this one, Steven? How about good goodness? I don't know if they have any money to spare. They're paying their coach nearly $10 million. They don't have a nickel though for players. How about Kentucky? Good Lord, they need help.
Mike, how much time do we have to talk about Kentucky? Because we might be here for a while. I jotted down basically everywhere because their defense is, I would assume, going to lose. I mean, obviously, I think Jamon Dumas-Johnson is a senior, and Deion Walker, I would assume, is gone to the NFL. And so I just think every level on defense, I'd be looking for help. Now, they do a pretty good job of developing guys on that side of the ball, so I suspect that Stoops and Brad White will sort of find some of the next guys. Offensively, though, I would have Dane Key, Barry and Brown, both juniors. Do they come back is a question. You've got offensive line help is a huge question mark. But really, this all comes back to quarterback play. Does Kentucky believe that Wimsatt, Cutter Boley, Brock Vandegrift, is one of them the answer? Do you take another one? That's a pretty crowded quarterback room if you do. So to me, this all hinges on what you feel about your quarterbacks currently on the roster.
Yeah, Cousin Benny says Kentucky's in the portal for a whole new team or program. And then Cousin Josh, he's Ole Miss guy, says, all right, you can take on that Kentucky schedule. I'm sorry about it, Josh. Well, man, that was no need to rehash it. But we've beat that horse to death. But yeah, I mean, Kentucky, I don't even know. I don't even know, Stephen. I don't know what is happening there. I don't know what they're doing with the coordinators. I think you're going to see some coaching overhaul. I think you'd see head coach overhaul if they could afford it. And not that they could. I mean, again, this is SEC. People can afford things, but the AD is hard-headed as can be. He's still not on board with paying players, and it's just a calamity. I feel bad because Kentucky was consistently good for 6-7 years, and now, man, you have to think they are one of the main ones against a 9-game schedule and against adding Texas and Oklahoma because I think they assumed this would happen. You know what?
Absolutely. And I was also I guess you knew going into Saturday's game, Louisville was favored, but I was also struck by how Louisville won that game. They physically beat up on Kentucky and with the way they ran the ball. And it's that's not how I think about Stoops. I think that they're going to be able to be the more physical team. Jeff Brom's a good coach at Louisville, and of course he's built high-powered offenses. But I thought Kentucky might have a little bit more pride than that with Louisville coming in on Saturday. Instead, I mean, that one was over in the first half, so that was pretty shocking too.
Right. All right. How about LSU, Stephen? They're going to have to add all these pieces because they're going to the national championship, according to Brian Kelly. So where is that at? And have you heard anything about Garrett Nussmeier? Because I hear mixed things. A couple weeks ago I heard, it's for sure he's coming back, and now it sounds kind of up in the air, which is interesting. Obviously, if he's not there, you'll have to let's assume he comes back. But what are the other pieces they should be concentrating on?
I think heavy offensive line help. And of course, that is the hardest position to find in the portal because everybody is looking for offensive line help. Right. And it's also hard to find SEC quality transfer starters too. Just because they were a good starter at the G5 level doesn't mean it's going to translate to a power conference. So I think offensive line, but also on defense, I would be trying to upgrade the trenches. They are going to lose quite a few pieces from this season. So it's almost like you could chart out if Nussmeier comes back, line of scrimmage. That's where Brian Kelly should spend his time and his money to upgrade. And also losing Kyron Lacey. I like LSU, some of the weapons they have, but also maybe you could stand to add a number one kind of go-to guy with Kyron Lacey departing.
Hey, Stephen, I'll comment on LSU in just a second, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention. A little bit of breaking news here. We had already talked about this at the start of the show, so if you missed it, go check it out. But Oklahoma has officially announced Ben Arkbuckle as the offensive coordinator, and I just thought you'd like to know. This is comments from Brent Venables, of course, prepared statement and all. But I'm incredibly excited to see our offense reach new heights under Ben's guidance and leadership, working alongside, this is the critical part, the rest of our offensive staff. Coach Joe John Finley, Coach Bill Bedenbaugh, Coach Murray, I believe that's DeMarco Murray, and Coach Jones. So, again, I know it's just a statement, but certainly sounds like, which is kind of weird, but they're installing a new offensive coordinator, but they're keeping all the other coaches. So I just want that to be on the record there.
I feel like Oklahoma's got Bill Bedenbaugh's, we talked about him, he's highly regarded. And it feels like the staff there is the offensive assistants, and they'll fill in, of course. I think it's a pretty solid staff, though. Arkbuckle, I think, can mold to his strengths and take some of the strengths they were doing this year. So I'm pretty optimistic right now, if I'm an Oklahoma fan, about where this is going.
But again, back to LSU, you just hit on all their men. I'll just say this, and this is kind of Captain Obvious over here, but they better fix that defense. Another year, again, and it was better this year, but it was so awful 2 years ago. It literally anything would have been better. But if they're awful on defense for the third year in a row, I don't think Brian Kelly survives it. I don't know if that's too bold for you, Stephen, but they better fix it. And again, I think a lot of those players got better on that side of the football, but when they really needed them, it's Alabama, it's Florida, it's A&M. They did not deliver on that side of the football.
Absolutely. 26.3 points a game allowed in SEC play this year. That's better, but it's still not where you want to be, and certainly not where you want to be considering the price tag for your defensive staff. So I think that there's LSU's had I would say kind of talent gap a little bit on defense the last couple of years. There's a chance to change that. They've had issues in the secondary. They've really targeted secondary and portal and high school recruiting. It's gotten a little bit better and will get a little bit better. Now, can you do that up front? Because they need some difference makers up there. That would really change kind of the whole complexion of that defense. Bo Davis is a great defensive line coach too. So that's, to me, if Nussmeier comes back and the LSU defense takes a step forward, then we can start talking college football playoff next year for this team.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about old Portal King over here, Steven? Ole Miss. This is going to be interesting to see how they don't have to worry about prepping for the playoff or anything, but what is the strategy here? Are we still going to be adding 30 transfers, you think, every year?
I would probably say it's going to be high. I don't know if it's going to be 30 plus, but when I look at this roster, there's a ton of roster gaps next season. I think you can count on Austin Simmons being the quarterback and being pretty good. But you look at, up and down the roster, offensive line is going to be a concern. Running back, receiver, pretty much everywhere in defense. You're losing all your kind of impact guys like Nolan and Princely. Obviously, Perkins coming back would be huge. But there's holes everywhere in this defense and the offense as well. So I almost go, almost everything here is a need for Ole Miss. But if I have to target something, it would almost be, let's fix the line of scrimmage, offense and defense, considering the players they're going to lose.
Right. And they went heavy on defensive line, obviously, and it paid off. They were fantastic on defense, but really whiffed on some of those offensive linemen. Of course, they were not awful or anything, but that certainly seemed to be a real issue. And they're losing a lot of offensive weapons too. So, this is going to be fascinating because I don't think they can go all in like they did last time. I don't think they'll have the money. But I could be wrong. But
you might have to do a 2-year kind of portal thing. You reload around Austin Simmons, and then you hope that the 2025 transfer class puts you in the same situation as the 2024 team, if that makes sense. Like you're loading up because you have the good quarterback, much like you had Jackson Dart this year.
And I believe it was, I could be wrong, but I believe it was last recruiting cycle. They really cleaned up in-state. They added a lot of really good prospects, particularly on the defensive line. So maybe those guys will be ready to go by year 2. I think maybe that's the strategy there. We're still going to be portal heavy, but maybe not as portal heavy as we've been. And I believe this year's recruiting class is pretty solid as well. A couple 5 stars, maybe an elite quarterback. I know an elite receiver. So um, maybe they're trying to split the difference a little bit, because now that they're winning at a high level, they can win some of the, and they've been winning a lot of big recruiting battles where they're not so portal dependent. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think it's really hard to bank on the portal delivering every year. And also you're competing against, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and all the others. Like, it's going to be hard to run the perfect kind of straight that they did. And of course, getting Princely, getting Walter Nolan, getting some of the other guys. So it's almost like, next year, not necessarily a rebuilding year, but you start to reload and rebuild that depth. And maybe you can go into the portal, like I was saying, for next year, and you get the guys that can help you make a even deeper run in 2026. Especially if Austin Simmons ends up being as good as maybe we think he is.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about for State, Steven? And can we find a defense coordinator in the portal these days? How's that work?
Yeah, definitely. I would say if I'm Mississippi State, I am just spending all my time recruiting defensive help. They gave up almost 39 points a game in SEC play. They had 10 sacks all season. I mean, to me, that they need to find guys who can affect the pass rush. They need to find just difference makers at all 3 levels. So if I'm Jeff Lebby, I spend all my time going into the portal and just finding defensive help, defensive impact players, and depth to help this defense.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's very early, and maybe the portal will decide this for us, Steven, but any idea what they should do, what they will do with, I believe Blake Shapen needs a waiver for another year, but I believe if he were to request it, he would get it, because he only played so many games this year. But Michael Van Buren, I mean, at times looked fantastic. I thought he kind of really ran out of gas at the end of the season. Maybe that's just a freshman hitting the wall. But what would you do at quarterback? Would you encourage Shapen to come back to make it a battle? Would you, again, you don't want to say push anyone out the door, but would you clear the way for Van Buren? What's your thoughts on that?
I would see if Shapen would come back. And I think if anything else, you have competition. And certainly with the spring window, he could always transfer out after that if
Right.
he didn't win the job. Something else too, if you're playing the long game, if you're Jeff Lebby, if Shapen ends up beating out Michael Van Buren could redshirt next year and save a year of eligibility. And so you would almost, solve your quarterback issues for 2025 and then have your guy for next in an additional year. Also on that offense for Mississippi State, I don't think they're going to have any trouble attracting a receiver or two because of the way they play. They also have to find some offensive line help too. So for whether it's Van Buren or Shapen, they've got to get better around them too for this offense to take off next season.
And one final thing on State, I believe they have got one of the top quarterbacks committed also. So, man, I know things are bleak. Coming one of the worst. I mean, this is literally the worst year I can remember in SEC. Can you remember a team going worse than 2-10, Steven? But again, we don't have to rehash that. But the point being is he really knows how to coach and recruit quarterbacks. They may have 2 good ones, and heck, a third one could be on the way. So if you need something to cling to, I think your quarterback position is going to be strong to perhaps stellar the entire time under Jeff Lebby, given what we've seen this year and what we've seen from Lebby in the past.
Absolutely. I think if Van Buren starts all 12 games next year for Mississippi State, I think he can have a breakout year. I think people in Starkville have watched him. You and I have watched him, but I think around the nation, he could really put up some big numbers in this system. So I'll be buying some stock if he ends up being the starter next year.
Yeah. How about Missouri, Steven? Again, this is another program that goes heavy in the portal at times to shore up. So, I mean, they're a mix of homegrown and hitting the portal, and they may need to continue to hit that portal if they're going to keep it the standard of winning 9-10 games a year.
I think so too. I mean, I think Missouri has done a good job of mining the portal every year. And I think Drinkowitz and the staff do a good job of identifying talent, putting it in positions when they get to Missouri. So I think they'll bring in a solid class. And I think the transfer needs have to start at quarterback. And we've already seen a handful jump in, someone like a Miller Moss, at USC that's transferring. I think Missouri's got to go out and get a quarterback. If nothing else, they have to have guys to compete to add depth. So I think that's where your biggest need is. But if you get past the quarterbacks, they're losing Luther Burden. Theo Wees is a senior. Mookie Cooper is a senior. I would like to see Missouri go out and add some weapons at receiver. And then on defense, there's going to be some turnover at linebacker and safety. I think those are two spots I would look to add if I was Missouri on the other side of the ball.
Mm-hmm. And just their track record, similar to Kiffin, they're not known as portal kings up there, but they had a lot of transfers and they've been very successful. I'm thinking over the years at receiver, at running back, offensive line, all over the defense, defensive back, defensive line. I mean, anywhere you can pretty much point to them having success bringing transfers in here. You don't want to be wholly dependent on that, but again, the standards have been raised. There's no time to. I know they've been recruiting pretty well, and I know they got a 5-star quarterback in the pipeline, but people are not going to be patient. Not after tasting success the last couple of years. You know what?
That's why I think they have to go out and get a quarterback for sure, if nothing else, to bridge the gap. Like until your young, talented quarterbacks are ready to play, go out and get somebody who can sort of supercharge this offense and be better right away. And so I trust Eli Drinkwitz and the staff to sort of find the right fits in the portal on both sides of the ball. But it does feel like with what they're losing in the quarterback question mark, there could be a step back next season. Of course, this could look a lot different in a couple of weeks if they really hit their needs and find a signal caller to sort of bridge that gap, like I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And then, this just popped into my head. This is not necessarily specific to Missouri or any other team, but I would imagine many of them will be involved. You remember last year, Cam Ward, the way I recall it was he basically said, I'm entering the portal, I'm declaring for the draft, and we'll see. You know what I mean? It was like I'm keeping all my options open. And I have to, again, they're different players, but I wonder if like Milroe will do that. I wonder if Quinn Ewers will do that. I mean, it doesn't hurt you. I'm not saying these guys can't go to the NFL and can have success, but just basically to weigh their options. But the way the calendar works, it's kind of against them. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here, but basically the point I'm asking you, Steve, could you see quarterbacks that are eyeing the NFL like a Jalen Milroe? What happens if he says, all right, I'm going to go to the NFL, and they say, well, you're a 4th round grade? I would think I'd be like, whoa, I can make, I don't know. I mean, I'm completely making this up, but let's say Missouri offers him $2 million next year, and he can improve his stock. I mean, I might look at something like that. So could you see some of these high profile quarterbacks that think that they're NFL passers, flirt with the idea of going to the NFL, but also going to the portal like Cam Ward did?
Yeah, I think there's no downside to it. And I hate to sound like this is all that matters, but if you can maximize your value and you find out that, hey, if I come back to college next year and somebody's going to pay me $2 million to be the starter, or I can be a 4th round pick in the NFL and maybe I can improve my stock. I mean, Cam Ward did this year. I mean, he could end up being a 1st round pick this year. So I know it's not necessarily, I don't want to sound like it's just all about the money or whatever, but I do think there could be scenarios where it would make sense. Like, why not come back, make a little extra cash, and try to improve your draft stock and keep your options open. So I think we could absolutely see it. The last year Cam Ward did it. I could see others doing it this year too.
Mm-hmm. And just let Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, let them all bid against themselves. You know what?
Silent bidding for the highest quarterback, right?
All right. All right. How about Oklahoma, Steve? Where are we at here? And again, so we got the offensive coordinator official. Man, I don't know how you evaluate the receivers because I don't know. I mean, most of them barely played or didn't play at all, and this is a tough one. And what about the offensive line? We certainly, I mean, they were not. They obviously weren't good enough, but we can't just sit here and say, well, let's just go portal every year because that's how we got in this situation. This is a fascinating one to me.
It really is. On the offensive line, I would always prefer to have a homegrown offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
then you add one or two pieces from the portal, like to sort of like finalize your starting five. I don't think you want to go like find 3 or 4 starters. I think you're asking for trouble
Right.
as Oklahoma did this year. So I think number one, the quarterback question. It looms over Oklahoma. Do they at least bring in some competition for Jackson Arnold? I think if Mateer enters the portal, it'll be very easy to connect him to Oklahoma, given the connections. So what Oklahoma decides at quarterback probably decides where they go elsewhere. But I think they have to add some receivers. If nothing else, you have to add some depth. We'll see which guys come back healthy next year, but still, I think you add a playmaker or two there. You look for maybe any offensive line help. The same thing on defense too. It feels like their defense is actually in pretty good shape. I know they're going to lose Danny Stutzman, but if there's a corner, always under Brent Venables, you always think about like which defensive lineman could come in and play because he's so good at developing them, finding them in the portal. So I would say if I'm Oklahoma, mostly offense, but I could see maybe adding some like defensive lineman or maybe a corner in the portal.
Mm-hmm. And then here's another thought that just popped into my head. And these are impossible things to answer, but I'm just spitballing here with you, Steven, and I appreciate all your knowledge and insights. That's why I'm asking. But let's say they do add Mateer, and let's say you're Jackson Arnold, and this is why it's so complicated, because there's so many other things involved, and mainly money. I mean, is Oklahoma going to sit here and I don't know. Again, I'm making all this up as I go along, but I would imagine both those guys, because they're quarterbacks at Oklahoma, are going to command a lot of money and NIL money, which is all legal. I'm fully supportive. But if I'm Jackson Arnold and they add this other quarterback, and I think I'm better than him, is there any shot in the world you would stay and say, well, how about I beat him in spring, and maybe I'll be the starting quarterback, unless, if it's an Auburn, if it's a Missouri, if it's another SEC team says, come on, Jackson Arnold, we love you, we would never add another guy over you. Yeah, I get it. You jump ship. But the way these things work, Steven, it seems like, he'd go to like North Texas or Southern Miss or like somewhere where he could just walk in and be the starter. And I don't know that really helps you when you could be a potentially a starting quarterback in the SEC. I can't imagine. I mean, again, I've not watched this guy play a second. So Mateer, he might win the Heisman next year. He might be that good. But if not, if he's not like some incredible player, he's just a really good player. If I'm looking at him and I'm Jackson Arnold, I say I can beat this guy out. In any world, does it make sense for, again, unless you got other SEC, you got Ohio State or something like that, just offering you to come. Does it make sense to like you said, stay for spring football and battle it out?
You can also, I think Jackson Arnold could still redshirt too. I think that would kind of be like the long shot scenario where you could stay and compete and potentially redshirt.
Right.
I mean, so much of the quarterbacks now, Mike, I mean, if you are not starting, you are hitting the portal right away. So I would suspect that if it's obvious to him that he's not going to start, I suspect that he'll hit the portal and try to find a starting job somewhere. And I think that also gets at like supply and demand. His talent's going to be in demand, and there's going to be a need for quarterbacks everywhere. You may remember this. Matt Rule said last year, I think good quarterbacks cost about $1 million in the portal.
Right.
And if all the top ones go off the board, he will be highly regarded too. So I suspect that if it's clear to him, I think he'll hit the portal.
Okay. Just shoot down my dreams here. All right. How about South Carolina, Steven? For where should the Gamecocks be looking in the portal? And I have to believe that, Rocket Sanders will likely off to the NFL. I think he is for sure off to the NFL. And they got some good weapons. But you got this potentially generational quarterback, maybe the best quarterback in the country next year. You got to help him out. I would think that would be chief on the list here.
Absolutely. I think the biggest priority for South Carolina is figuring out what you have to do to maximize Lenore Sellers' talent. And to me, that is getting dudes at receiver who are like number one type guys who can go up and make plays, stretch the field. South Carolina's got a lot of nice weapons, like you said, but I would like to see some like elite number one type receivers. And there are already some guys in the portal that I would go after if I'm South Carolina. So I think you start at receiver, kind of as always in the SEC. You're looking at like offensive linemen. They got to continue to improve that group. Is there a running back in the portal they like to help offset the loss of Rocket Sanders? And then the defense, defensive tackle could be a spot where they're going to lose some guys. But you bring back Dylan Stewart off the edge. Do you find somebody opposite of that, like you did Kyle Kennard this year? So definitely some needs here for South Carolina, but it also doesn't feel like there's a glaring sort of major need that this team has. They feel like they're going into next season in a pretty good spot.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not naive, Stephen. I know that money drives all this. And that's, that's a different conversation, whether that's good or bad. But do you think that South Carolina at all gets any discount from, and again, I'm not talking like $1 million discount, but if it's, if Georgia's offering someone 800,000 and South Carolina can only give them 700,000, just the fact that you could be teamed up with Sellers, how could you not watch this guy and be like, good Lord, I want to play with this guy. He could be the future. We're going to win some games. And even if the money is not exactly the same, maybe it's worth it because my stock will rise. And quite frankly, maybe South Carolina, I know it didn't quite work out. Maybe it's a bad example, but South Carolina could be that Ole Miss, could be the Missouri from last cycle where their fan base said, hey, we got this team. Let's throw all the money we can at it to get us some players. If I'm a South Carolina fan, and I'm not talking about like hardworking people that can, it costs a lot of money to go to these games. I'm talking about the boosters. Put your damn money where your mouth is. You're sitting on millions of dollars. Give some to get us some players here because if South Carolina hits again in the portal, I mean they could be they should be in the playoff now, but they'll be a lock if they can surround Sellers with some talent.
And I mean, it's not crazy to think that you could be playing for a quarterback who is in the Heisman Trophy mix next year. I don't think that's a big stretch at all to think that Lenora Sellers or DJ Lagway or some others in the SEC at quarterback will be in the Heisman discussion. So I think to your point, I think that not necessarily like a discount, but I do think there is that thing where it's like if George has already added 4 receivers and you could go be the number 2 receiver at South Carolina, why not take a little less, play with a good quarterback, and see more opportunities? So yeah, absolutely. I could definitely see that. I think quarterbacks like Lagway and Sellers are going to be huge selling points for Florida and South Carolina in the portal.
Oh, snap, Steven. Shout out Cousin Isaac.
Thanks, cuz.
Just gave us $100. My goodness. Steven, he says South Carolina should still be solid on defense with that $1 million NI deal being worked out with Dylan Stewart. It costs a lot to keep his high profile talent, but he's worth every penny if you ask me. But we have a lot of senior talent to replace on defense. Also some very good freshman receiver class coming to surround Heisman, including Sellers' little brother. That's a Disney story right there, Steve. The guy wins a Heisman, he's thrown to his brother. Maybe we can get them both to be Heisman candidates here, but appreciate you, Cousin Isaac. But yeah, I mean, I'm putting the cart in front of the horse. Season's not even over yet over here, but if I'm South Carolina fan, I'm going all in because here's our window right here. You know what?
Oh, absolutely. This is the window for South Carolina. I mean, Lenora Sellers is a redshirt freshman, so next year he'd be 3 years removed, and if he's that good, he could go to the NFL. So you better maximize it. And of course, Dylan Stewart's only got one more year after 2025. But to his point, I do think that is an interesting point. Like they're going to be losing, at least 3 or 4 main contributors on the defensive line. One of those is Kyle Kennard. You look at linebacker like Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams. Like they have some guys they're going to be losing on defense. So, also fortunate at corner too. So I think each level of the defense, I could definitely see them mining the portal for. The thing that would give me some confidence is like, hey, Kyle Kennard came over from Georgia Tech and might end up winning SEC Defensive Player of the Year. I kind of trust the staff to figure it out. So to me, I think you made the comparison like Missouri or Ole Miss. I think that's the exact way to think about it. If I'm South Carolina, the window is open. I think they're probably going to be a preseason top 10 to 15 team next year, and rightfully so, because that's how good I think Lenore Sellers can be next year. Plus, adding improvement around him only raises the floor and ceiling for this team even higher.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's early to look at schedules, but I'm gonna do it anyway, Steven. I mean, you avoid Texas, you avoid Tennessee, you avoid Georgia, you get Bam at home. You know that was a tough one. You do have to go to Ole Miss, to A&M, to LSU, to Missouri. So I mean, there's no cakewalks here, but I don't know. Next year could be one hell of a year for the Gamecocks. How about the team that it could be a hell of a year this year, Steve? But seriously, the portal for Tennessee. Tennessee's always active. They got a lot of money to spend in NIL. Where do you see the Vols going here in the portal?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is almost the same thing as South Carolina with Lenore Sellers and Florida with DJ Lagway, and that is they got their quarterback. And I really like the growth that Nico has showed the last couple of weeks. Like, I think if you're just looking at a stat sheet, sometimes it sort of hides some of the improvement, but I thought like Saturday he made some really impressive throws and sort of that growth, continuing that growth curve that we want to see coming into the playoffs. So I think Tennessee's got a quarterback, and they've got their dude at quarterback. So can you continue to surround him with skill talent to support the passing game? Obviously, offensive line is going to be a huge question. I think Tennessee could lose 3 or 4 starters there. And then on defense, defensive tackle, James Pierce. The secondary was a concern last year. Probably finding some guys to reload on defense. The defensive line is probably going to be their biggest priority in the portal on that side of the ball this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're in a tough spot, Steven. You said it, and it's 100% true. Offensive line. Everybody wants them. So you got to overspend, and you don't want to just blow up your offensive line and have all these transfers because that rarely works. So it's going to be fascinating. Tennessee keeps going after receivers, too, and very few of them seem to be hitting. I'll be kind of curious to see what they do there. Maybe at running back, because you have to assume Samson's going to be in the NFL. I know they like Peyton Lewis, but behind him, I don't know. They're lacking depth on a lot of offensive positions. So I think Tennessee will be active. Now they have signed a ton of defensive linemen. So yeah, they're always looking for, particularly in the last couple of years. I think they've added at least interior defensive linemen every transfer portal. So yeah, they'll continue to do that. But man, this is another team. They got money to burn, so they're going to burn it here to remain. Because again, they're another one that's tasted success. They're in the playoff. That money's still going to be there as long as they don't, as long as they keep making the playoff, I should say.
Winning equals like the taste of winning and getting to the playoff equals, hopefully for Tennessee, like more donations equally more winning the following year, right? I mean, you get to the playoff and you lose, you want to get more NIL dollars to go get those defensive linemen. So yeah, I think Tennessee's got the window is open here for Tennessee. And I mean, I think as we're talking, tonight, as I'm thinking about this next year, and you mentioned some of the schedules, it's like, yeah, that's a tough road schedule, but they're losing like this guy, and you go through it. Just like, it feels like Tennessee's going to be in a good spot next year because it's like continuity with Heupel, Nico, and what they can put around him. So line of scrimmage will be a question, but also it doesn't feel like this. It feels very much like this year where we could see a lot of variance from week to week and home field mattering a lot as well.
Oh yeah. Well, speaking of, big spenders. Texas gonna keep spending as long as they keep winning, Steven. It fuels itself here. Texas, where could you see them going in the portal? They seem to get whoever they want. It seems like when they target someone in the portal, they usually get them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of the easiest thing I look at Texas is it's like Georgia. They take the best of the best in the portal. They have a specific need, and they target the highest rated player or two at those positions. So I think the first need that comes to mind is going to be the offensive line. A couple seniors starting this year. Kelvin Banks, of course, got hurt in the game Saturday night against Texas A&M. The backup played pretty well, all things considered, against Texas A&M. So how do they recycle the offensive line will be crucial. Can they add any wide receivers, tight ends to support Arch Manning? And then over on defense, they were looking for secondary help this year. I would suspect they may look there again this year. And as always, hate to sound like a broken record, but if you're in the SEC, you're looking for defensive line help, and Texas is going to have some turnover there. So I suspect they will be into the portal looking for defensive linemen this offseason.
Right. And they're another one they could sell. I mean, my goodness, Steven, I know you watch a game, but how many times would Arch touch the ball? Like 5 times, and here comes the phenom, Arch Manning. I mean, it's going to be on an epic scale. I mean, heck, they're about to win the SEC. They're probably going to win the national championship, and their fans they're ready to kick their quarterback out the damn door because it's just not as exciting as it is under Arch. So same deal we've said about a lot of these guys. I mean, you got the attention, the hype, the production, all this. NFL people, they're going to have their eyes on every. I mean, they do already, but it'll be on an epic scale with old Arch running the thing because the hype's going to go up to 11, perhaps, particularly if he lives up to all the massive hype. You know what?
Oh, absolutely. I can already see it. And I don't mean this like in a bad way. It's like I could see like every throw that Arch makes that's great being like picked apart on social media or just like shared 500 times is like, this is the future of the NFL. So yeah, get ready for the hype meter to go up very, very high, potentially in the playoff and in the next year for sure on Arch.
So how about, I said winning fuels spending. So does losing, Steven. Trust me, losing. Just look at Ohio State. Those damn losers. Of course, it didn't work for them either, but A&M's going to be fueled to spend, I would think, to catch up to Texas after getting humbled there. Where do you see A&M spending the most here in the transfer portal?
Never a good thing when you spend reportedly 10, 15, 20 million on a roster to still lose to a very bad Michigan team, right? It's not been a good week for Ryan Day in Ohio State. I think for Texas A&M, the one question that I have is, do they believe in Marcel Reed as their starter? And I think you saw enough to suggest that he has enough upside to be your guy. I think the other factor in that is you have to give him more help, and that's offensive line and certainly wide receiver. They need some guys who can consistently win one-on-one and also who can be the number one receiver next season. So I'm looking at wide receiver. I also think they could use more depth on the defensive line. I'm sure they're going to have some turnover there for guys going to the NFL, but just more depth. And certainly, I think secondary, we've seen depth groups kind of been up and down last couple of weeks. Probably adding more talent there would only help this team make a run at the playoff next year.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of feels like to me, I could be wrong because again, that the expectation is to win and win big, and they're the ones that tasted some, and then it kind of fell apart. But if I'm A&M, I mean, I think you got to win as many high school battles as you can, well, particularly on the line of scrimmage, because again, you could bring in some guys. Nick Scorton played really well. He kind of disappeared late though, but I don't know. I don't know if you can do what Texas just did if you're A&M just via the portal. I mean, it might be a little bit of a slower rebuild, not a rebuild, but a slower build. So again, because we're talking national championships, that's what they want down there. They don't want to win 10 games. They want to try to win a national championship. And they're on the right path, I think, under Coach Elko, but they may be a cycle or two away from actually getting there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the foundation has been laid, I think, for Texas A&M. I think you have to feel good about the direction of it. And like I said, I think their evaluation of Marcel Reed is going to be pretty important. Like I would lean that he is somebody that you can build around. If you look at, Texas and their defensive stats this year, Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, two standout players for Texas. I would even venture to say they both should be all SEC types this year. But those guys are homegrown defenders. And so I think, Mike, to your point, I think A&M went heavy into the portal last year. I think you'd like to see the roster be more of a homegrown on offensive line and just on defense in general. And then you sort of do what Texas and Georgia do, which is strategically find the 3 or 4 players you need to go to that next level, as opposed to bringing in 30 plus this offseason.
Mm-hmm. And then last, we got Vanderbilt here, Stephen. And this was another tough one because I hope Diego burns the NCAA with his lawsuit. And let's give all the junior college guys an extra year. But will that happen? I don't know. I have no clue where that will go. But I hope he's back. And but I guess let's assume he's not. Where does Vanderbilt go here?
I think they have to look at quarterback. So they brought in Nate Johnson last year too with Diego Pavia, and I think what does the staff feel about Nate Johnson is going to be kind of crucial. I think he definitely fits what Tim Beck wants to do on offense. Is he as good as Diego Pavia? I think the jury's still out on that one. So I think if there's a quarterback that makes sense, I think you have to go out and get him if you're Vanderbilt. But also that's not the only position of need. They need help on the offensive line. There's a very senior laden group. And also like on defense, they got to get some guys who get to the quarterback. Only 23 sacks this year. Going to have some turnover too at safety. CJ Taylor, DeRicky Wright, both seniors. So I'd like to see Vanderbilt be a little active in finding some guys who can cover and also get to the quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see if they can keep it up. I hope they do. Yeah. I believe the stadium will be done by next season. I mean, it's the half that's done looks pretty awesome. You know what I mean? So I know what I've seen Arkansas talk about it in Kentucky, but if and when they really do have a, whatever you want to call it, a salary cap of how many millions they could spend, perhaps no one stands to gain more than old Vanderbilt, to where they could actually have an allocated amount of money that they can spend on a roster. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see.
Definitely a more level playing field, if you will, but also
Right.
it does feel like Vanderbilt is at least trying on the facilities and NIL dollars. They were certainly more active, it seemed like, last offseason. So I think there's some staying power there, but this offseason will test it because they have so many roster questions, and Pavia probably covered up for some of these other questions this season because he was so good.
Mm-hmm. But I would also say, again, I got caught up in the Pavia stuff too, and I love him. He's awesome. But you can't beat Alabama. You can't beat some of these teams without some kind of proof of concept of their recruiting and developing. And it to me it appears that it is working. So yeah, another year of that with hopefully some portal additions should pay off for Vanderbilt, I think.
They gave up almost 40 points a game in the SEC last year, and they cut that number to around 25. So I think kudos to Clark Lee for taking over the defensive play calling. And that group is definitely back on track. And I think you could make a case that this group could be even better. Like if they fill their portal needs, they can lean on that group until they find the right quarterback, right kind of pieces on offense next year. So there's some good things happening at Vanderbilt for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, I mean, shoot, we've almost went 2 hours here. So I hate to, game of the week here, only game. Spend so short time on it, but maybe just quick thoughts, because you'll be back on Wednesday. We're going to break the whole thing down, and Steve is going to make his prediction then. But what just your early read on Georgia and Texas before we get you out of here?
Mike, I think my thought process going into this game is like what happened last time, and both defenses really dominated. I mean, I know Georgia won, but like I said earlier, both of those teams under 300 yards. So I think now that both teams have had a chance to sort of like get the first round over with, what adjustments do they make the second time? I suspect that Texas will try to get off to a faster start offensively. We saw what Georgia Tech did with all the motions and shifts and stuff like that. I could see Texas trying to get those receivers motioning in space, creating some mismatches, because Georgia has been a little bit prone to giving up big plays in the passing game. So what happens in the trenches, crucial again, because Texas struggled the first time. And also I think the quarterbacks, Ewers was healthy enough to win on Saturday. Carson Beck is playing better. And then kind of one final thought is trying to figure out this game. What version of Georgia is going to show up on Saturday is the hardest question that I don't know the answer to as we sit on Monday, a couple days out from kickoff right now.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to see it. I can tell you that, Steven. So, again, I appreciate you spending all this time, dropping all this knowledge. Again, we'll be back. Shane and I will be talking about this game all week. Steven will be back on Wednesday, breaking it all down, making his prediction for the game. So, Steven, before you go, as always, can you tell the cousins how can they follow you? How can they find your work?
You can follow all of my work over at athlonsports.com. We've got bowl projections, got transfer stuff, coaching stuff. If you're anything in the world of college football, I've got you covered over there. And you can also follow me over on Twitter at AthlonSteven, Steven LCFB on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Steven. So thanks again for stopping by. Really appreciate these weekly segments we got on the show. You add so much value. So it's, the buffoonery of Shane and I, we need to mix it up a little bit here. So we thank you as always. And we thank each and every one of you for hanging out. We'll catch you tomorrow on the next one.
Hey, buddy, this beer's for you, Mike.